There is a specific kind of tiredness that doesn't go away with sleep. It's a weight that lives in the marrow of your bones, a quiet humming frequency of doing that never quite resolves into being. If you were born in that strange, narrow window between 1977 and 1985, you exist in a psychological borderland. You are the last generation to remember the world before it was loud, and the first to be expected to master the noise. You are the bridge, the human transition between an analog childhood and a digital adulthood. And that bridge is starting to buckle under the weight of a history it was never meant to carry alone. You aren't quite a Gen Xer, hardened by the nihilism of the 70s, and you aren't quite a millennial, defined by the optimism of the early internet. You are a Xennial, but even that label feels too clinical, too much like a marketing demographic for a soul that feels increasingly displaced. For you, the world changed while you were still forming your identity. You grew up playing in the dirt until the streetlights came on, existing in a world of physical maps, landlines, and the sacred privacy of a closed bedroom door. Then, just as you reached the threshold of adulthood, the floor dropped out. The world went digital, and you were forced to upload your entire existence into a machine that never sleeps. This shift created a unique psychological phenomenon, the chronic translator. You are constantly translating your past self to your present self. You remember the silence, but you live in the static. And because you are the bridge, you have spent your entire life holding space for everyone else, caring for aging parents who don't understand the modern world, while raising children who have never known a world without a screen. You are the emotional shock absorber of the century, and the reason you feel so fundamentally exhausted is that no one ever offered to absorb that shock for you. To understand why you feel this way, we have to go back to the living room of your childhood. Think about the silence of a Sunday afternoon in 1988. There were no notifications, no endless scrolls. There was only the ticking of a clock and the feeling of boredom. A boredom that was actually a fertile ground for the soul to rest. In that world, your value was tied to your presence. But as you moved into your 20s, the metric changed. Suddenly, your value was tied to your accessibility. You became the generation of the always on. Because you remember the off switch, you feel the violation of its absence more than anyone else. It's like living with a phantom limb. You remember what it was like to be unreachable, and the fact that you can no longer find that sanctuary feels like a low-grade trauma you haven't yet named. This is the invisible wall of the Xennial experience. On one side is a childhood of tactile reality, the smell of a library book, the grainy texture of a Polaroid, the sound of a cassette tape being wound with a pencil. On the other side is the hyper-efficient, algorithmic reality of today. You are standing on that wall, trying to balance two completely different ways of being human, and the psychological cost of that balance is what we call emotional erosion. Emotional erosion happens when a person is forced to adapt too quickly to a landscape that doesn't respect their internal rhythm. You were raised with the values of the 20th century, loyalty, stability, linear progress, but you were cast into a 21st century economy that rewards volatility, self-branding, and constant pivots. You were told that if you worked hard and followed the rules, the path would be clear. But the rules changed while you were halfway down the road. You are the generation that did everything right, only to find that the finish line had been moved, or worse, deleted entirely. This created a specific type of micro-trauma. It wasn't a single explosive event, but 1,000 tiny fractures. It was the slow realization that the career paths of your parents no longer existed. It was the sudden intrusion of the workplace into your pocket via the smartphone. It was the way your social life moved from the porch to the platform. For you, these weren't just tech updates. They were the dismantling of your safety net. You lost the ability to go home because the world followed you there. Think about the concept of ambiguous loss. Usually, this refers to losing someone who is still physically present, like a person with dementia. But for those born between 1977 and 1985, ambiguous loss applies to your own life. You have lost the world you were prepared for. You are mourning a version of adulthood that was promised to you in your youth, one defined by boundaries and a sense of enough. Now you live in a world of more data, more productivity, more comparison. You are grieving a quietude that no one else seems to miss, and because that grief has no funeral, it stays stuck in your chest. You are the latchkey generation that grew up to be the burnout generation. As children, many of you were fiercely independent. You navigated the world with a bicycle and a set of house keys, learning to solve your own problems and soothe your own fears. This independence was your superpower, but in adulthood, it has become your cage. You find it nearly impossible to ask for help because your childhood taught you that you were the only one you could rely on. You have become the hyper-independent overachiever, the person who says, "I've got it," even when your hands are shaking from the weight. This hyper-independence is a survival mechanism that has outlived its usefulness. It's the empty well syndrome. You keep lowering the bucket, hoping to find a drop of energy or passion for your work, your relationships, or your hobbies, but the well is dry because you've spent decades pouring into everyone else's containers. You feel like a fraud because on the outside, you look like you've made it. You have the house, the job, the family, the grown-up life. But inside, there is a hollow space where your own desires used to live. You have spent so long being the bridge that you forgot you were also the traveler. You've spent so long translating the needs of the older generation to the younger generation that you've lost your own native tongue, the language of what you need. This isn't just midlife malice. It is a fundamental identity crisis born from being the literal turning point of human history. You are the last people who will ever know what it feels like to be truly alone with your thoughts, without the temptation of a glowing screen. And that brings us to the most painful realization of all. The reason you feel so disconnected isn't because you're failing, it's because you're functioning exactly as you were programmed to, but the software is running on hardware that is crying out for a different kind of life. You are trying to run a soul that requires stillness on a system that demands speed. You are tired because you are fighting a war against your own nature, trying to convince yourself that this frantic, fragmented existence is normal when every cell in your body remembers a time when it wasn't. The realization that you are the last generation to remember the before is a heavy mantle to wear. It means you are the keepers of a specific kind of silence, a frequency of human connection that is rapidly being edited out of the social script. But because you are so busy keeping everyone else's world spinning, you've likely ignored the fact that your own internal gears have been grinding without oil for nearly 2 decades. You have been running on the fumes of your childhood resilience, and those fumes are finally dissipating. This is where the survival paradox begins to manifest. As a child of the late 70s and early 80s, you were conditioned to be the reliable one. Whether you were a latchkey kid making your own grilled cheese after school, or the teenager who was the first to figure out how to program the VCR for your parents before you even had a driver's license, you became the family's unofficial IT department and emotional anchor before you even had a driver's license. You learned early that being useful was the surest way to be safe. But now, in your 40s or late 30s, that usefulness has become a parasite. It's a quiet tragedy, isn't it? To be so capable that no one ever asks if you're okay. Because you've always handled it, the career shifts, the global recessions, the transition from paper to pixels, the people around you assume you're invincible. And because you value that image of the steady hand, you've started to believe it yourself. You've built a life that is a monument to your competence, but inside that monument, the air is getting thin. You are experiencing functioning despair. The ability to meet every deadline, pack every school lunch, and attend every Zoom call while feeling like a ghost in your own skin. We have to look at the metaphor of the emotional debt. For 20 years, you've been borrowing from your future peace to pay for your current productivity. You told yourself, "I'll rest when the project is done," or "I'll reconnect with myself once the kids are older," or "I'll find my passion again when things stabilize." But for our generation, things never stabilized. We moved from 9/11 to the 2008 crash to a global pandemic to the AI revolution. The stability you were waiting for was a mirage, and the debt has now come due. The exhaustion you feel isn't just physical, it's the sound of the soul's collection agency knocking on the door. It's the unrooted self crying out for a sense of place. When you were young, place was physical. It was a street corner, a mall, a specific chair. Now, place is a URL. It's a cloud. It's nowhere and everywhere at once. For a generation that spent its formative years in the tangible world, this placelessness creates a permanent state of low-level anxiety. You are searching for a home that has been converted into data. Think about the way you consume information now compared to how you did in 1994. Back then, if you wanted to know something, you went to the source. You waited. You sat with the unknowing. There was a sacredness to the gap, the space